Shut up, suit up, show up. Those 6 words are the daily mantra of a psychologist named James Hollis, who's the author of a book called Living Between Worlds, book I read a few years ago, highly recommend it. And he says them to himself. He says them to himself as he rides the elevator down to his car each morning. With the first, he's telling himself to stop whining and complaining. It's his recognition that there are so many people on this planet who have no home tonight, who have no food, whose children are being murdered, and that he has a roof over his head, food on the table, and relative security. I suspect that's true for most of us here today, yes? Though I sometimes complain about a lot of things, I really don't have anything to complain about. How about you? For Hollis, suit up means that we deal with our life as it is. We don't run away from life or make excuses. We don't hide from or avoid what is before us and what is being asked of us. We don't give up when life is hard or doesn't go our way. We do our homework, we prepare, we get dressed and ready for life. Some days that's easier to do than other days. You know that as well as I do, right? The third part reminds him that we all have to show up. That's really all of us, that's really all any of us can do. I've often said to myself and to others that 90 or 95% of life is just showing up. I know we know this. We show up as best we can and offer what we have. We don't hold back and we keep nothing in reserve. Amen. It's a vulnerable but authentic way to live, I believe. We do it today, again tomorrow, and the day after. Sometimes showing up is the hardest work we do. Though he's a bit more direct and blunt than me, I think Hollis' mantra is as much an offertory sentence and invitation. This reminds me when I used to lead the Spanish services at the Congregational Church of San Mateo. Every Wednesday, I would say to them, bring all that you are and all that you have, come into God's courts with praise and thanksgiving. I would say those words immediately before the offertory. It wasn't just a cue for whomever was passing the offering to begin the offertory or bring forward the bread and wine and money, because we celebrated communion every week there. It's not really even about the bread, wine, and money, and wasn't limited to what we did with what we did together in those services. You see, for me, it describes a way of living. It's about offering and presenting ourselves to life, to God, to one another. It's what Hollis calls keeping our appointment with life. Keeping our appointment with life. And I think that's exactly what we see happening with what I like to call Simon. in today's gospel. In order to understand what I mean by that, you need to know a little bit more about Simon in the Orthodox tradition. You see, in the Orthodox tradition, it says that Simon was one of the 70 men who translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, what we call the Septuagint. While he was working on that translation, an angel promised that before he died, Simon would see the Lord's Messiah, the child born of a virgin, Jesus, the one Simon takes in his arms today. Again, according to Orthodox tradition, that translation began around the 3rd century before Jesus' birth and was completed 132 years before Jesus was born. Are you doing the math? That means Simon was a really old guy. One strand of the Orthodox tradition says Simon was 270 years old when Jesus was presented in the temple. Another part of the tradition says Simon died at the age of 360. But let's not get stuck on Simon's age. Whether Simon was really that old or how someone can live that long, the question isn't, did that really happen? Or how could that happen? The question is, for me anyways, what does that mean for me, for us? Here's what I think it means. Every day for weeks, months, years, decades, maybe even centuries, Simon is left waiting and wondering, is this the day? Is this the day I will see salvation, or is this the day I will give up hope? Is this the day I will experience the fulfillment of the promise, or is this the day I despair of it ever being fulfilled? Simon was living in an in-between place, yes? Between the promise of life and the fulfillment of life. You know what that's like, right? I'm sure. You've had times when you were living an in-between life. Maybe that's where you are today. Between a promise and the fulfillment. Between what used to be and what will be next. Between what you have and what you want. Between your prayers and God's response. Between pain and healing. Between a known past and an unknown future. Between the reality of what is and your dream of what could be. Now, in my imagination, again, the thing that strikes me about Simon is that he continued to show up. He continued to be vigilant and attentive. He continued to trust the promise. He continued to wait with hope and expectation. He never despaired, it seems like. He never walked away from the promise of life or the possibility of more life. Every day he showed up to life as best he could with what he had. What if that's enough, though? What if that's the most any of us can ever do? What if that's all God ever asks of us? What would it mean for us to show up today a bit more fully than we did yesterday? What keeps you from showing up? What parts of yourself are you withholding? And what would it be like to offer just a bit more of yourself today than you did yesterday? One of the things I'm learning is that when I show up, my life improves and is more complete for me. I see that in my marriage and other relationships, and my cause of minister, and my compassion and care for others, and in my concern for and response to violence, injustice, inequality, and the pain of the world. Showing up doesn't necessarily make life easier or eliminate problems, but it offers us meaning and lets us live more wholeheartedly. And I believe that changes everything. Simon puts it like this: Master, now you are dismissing your servant in peace, according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation. Simon kept his appointment with life, didn't he? What about you and me? We all have an appointment with life, I believe, and the world is depending on us to show up as often and as best we can. Amen. I really want to get into music right now, but talk back. Talk back. All right, the floor is yours. And please remember, if you could come up, that would be much appreciated for the folks in Zoom. So.